Hi everyone, welcome to this Tata Steel chess tournament recap. The last round was yesterday and we got an exciting playoff to decide the entire tournament. I have some categories of, let's call them awards I'm giving out for this tournament. I have the biggest blunder, most cynical player, biggest disappointment, best game, homeboy hero, world number 2, top opening disaster, and finally we have the tiebreak maestro category. Wow, Hammer has fixed his sound, says Thomas. That sounds like you can hear me. Biggest blunder is no doubt Carlsen. The speculation is on. Who are the winners of the different categories? I'm going to just repeat it. Biggest blunder, most cynical player, biggest disappointment, best game, homeboy hero, world number 2, and top opening disaster, and finally the tiebreak maestro. The speculation is on, and I want to say a big thank you to the chess.com team. Who have been helping me out with graphics, and as a consequence, one of the things you will notice is that I have new subscriber badges in the chat, and also I have sent 5 emotes to Twitch for approval. So there's a lot of very cool graphic stuff coming in the next couple of streams. I think we just got to start right at it because I have a match against John Bartholomew later today. I'm playing a Fischer match, Fischer random. It's the random starting position. Every single game there's a new starting position. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it'll be very interesting. John and I will be featured for an hour each on the Twitch front page, which is a very, very big deal. And I'm looking forward to it. But as such, being a competitive person, I gotta, rest up and properly prepare for the match. So I'm gonna keep this as short and sweet as possible. And I'm going to start out with the game against between Karyakin and Jones. Karyakin and Jones. And the award I'm giving out is the most cynical player. So the most cynical player, I'm giving the award to Gawain Jones. And I think we should discuss his approach to the wide opening. So this is his actually first round game against Karyakin. And he goes for e4, which he has done in the past. And this very fashionable Italian line. But after knight f6, where most players go d3 to protect their e4 pawn, he went d4, which looks like a much better move, but it's also much more concrete. And as such, you get you get the conflict immediately. And basically the entire reason nobody plays this is that they solved it. They decided that this approach for white is not bad, but it's not good either. And Karyakin demonstrates why. He goes e takes d4, c takes, bishop check, bishop in between, takes, and now d5 is the very important move. Striking back in the center, making sure that the very sweet white pawns on d4 and e4 are being split up. So you don't want to allow your opponents to have this kind of magnificent central structure. Karyakin goes and breaks it down, and after takes, Gawain goes queen b3. And all of this has been played very many times before, but it's just equal. Because now black goes knight a5, attacking both the queen and the bishop. And then the queen tries to save itself, queen a4 check, and you go back with the knight. And this is pretty effective, because at this point you actually threaten knight b6. And also you're ready to castle. So the queen is awkwardly placed on a4, and so Gawain just plays it back to b3. And this is a repetition already on move 12. So Gawain, with the white pieces in the first game of the entire tournament, goes directly for this line, which essentially when he goes d4, this central advance, he's aiming for this position, saying that this is a draw for black if he goes knight a5. And he's saying, I'm the lowest rated player in the field. I'm going to be pretty happy with a draw. And for this, he gets the most cynical player award. But that's not to say that I disagree with his decision. I think he could be right. I think that as the lowest rated player, it makes some sense trying to entice your opponents to play risky chess. And in this game against Karyakin, it worked. Karyakin decided that even with the black pieces, I'm not going to be happy with the draw against Gawain. And I'm going to play this knight to e7. And this knight to e7 is well known as being a bit better for white. So in this game, you could say that there's a psychological warfare going on. Gawain just blatantly saying that I'm happy to give away my white game for a draw. And he's hoping, I think, to some extent, that his opponent will play an inferior line or play a risky line and do something to put themselves in jeopardy. And I have some experience with this because I played Magnus at the Norway Chess Tournament with the white pieces, and it's not entirely the same because I wasn't really looking for forced draw lines, but I got a good advantage out of the opening because Magnus decided that he wanted to play risky chess. He wanted to play risky moves in order to create an imbalance in the position. And he ended up regretting that decision since I got a good position and ended up winning. So while I'm awarding Gawain with the most cynical player award, I'm not sure it's the wrong call. And especially for the first round game, if you manage to convince your opponents that you just want to kill the white games, it means that they will have to take even bigger risks early on to just get a game. On the other hand, everybody in this field knows that Gawain is a pretty good player. So they also have to consider that if we do play an inferior opening line, it may not work out very well. And Gawain was on 50% for 7 rounds or something. So clearly he knows how to play chess. But this approach he had with trying to force draws with the white pieces was interesting. And speaking of new design, and a big thank you to Ole Henrik. I also started learning how to use the alert box. So for now, I'm having the very cute star doing a little dance. But I'm hoping in the near future that we will have a hammer crushing down on a chessboard. That's going to be super awesome. I can't wait for you to see it. I've seen some early sketches and it's looking really good. And Lindelam is commenting that Gawain did the same thing against Mamedyarov, and that's the game I'm going to go to next. So this was not a one-time occurrence from Gawain. He also did the same thing in a later round, and actually in that later round, somehow Mamedyarov was the one getting getting the criticism. Which I think it's very difficult to fault a player for playing a draw with black in a top level tournament. But on the other hand, Gawain had already shown his hand. He had demonstrated against Karyakin that if you want to play for a win with the black pieces, you'll have to take risks, because I'm gonna be happy with the draw. And what Mamedyarov did was just he played a very solid opening, the Petrov defense, and Gawain didn't really have any ambition, and they managed to make a repetition very early on. G6, bishop G5, threatening the queen. You block the attack, but then bishop H6 prevents castling, and so you go bishop F8 to get the annoying white bishop away, and they ended up going back and forth, back and forth. So compared to the Karyakin game, here it's more visible, because Mamedyarov said, if you're not going to play with white, I'm not going to play with black. Being white is a decent advantage in chess, and making a draw with the black pieces is going to be a fine result in a top level tournament, regardless of who you play. So yeah, I think from a sports psychology kind of aspect, I think it's a very interesting decision from Gawain, because I really think it could provoke people into playing more aggressively, more loosely against him when they have the black pieces. But Mamedyarov didn't fall for any such psychological traps, and he just made the draw. And well, I think it makes Gawain look a bit silly, but on the other hand, Gawain at this point, when this game was played, he had 2 losses in a row. So he was saying in the interview afterwards that, well, I'm on 2 losses. This is a very tough field. I don't want to get on 3 losses, and so I made a draw. And then Shak is going, well, I have the black pieces. Personally, I think it's never the black player's fault. I think Mamedyarov was a bit upset after the game, because people were blaming him for playing a draw when he had the black pieces, and that I understand. I don't think people can get angry with you for making a draw with black. But on the other hand, he was playing the bottom seed who had just lost 2 games in a row, and he was fighting for tournament victory with Anish and Magnus. So just from a maximum, trying to get maximum out of your tournament kind of standpoint, then probably he should have played something more aggressive, especially when he had demonstrated earlier against Karyakin, Gawain had, that his strategy would be to lure people into playing risky stuff with black. Vertrich asks, why cynical if it's a good plan? Well, I think that's basically the definition of cynical, right? I mean, it goes against what most people would like you to do, but it serves your self-interest. And I think most cynical stuff is stuff that is usually maybe a good idea, but which other people may react to. Okay, we have the next category, and it is the biggest blunder. And no surprises for guessing the winner of biggest blunder. It was actually the only bad move. I think so. The only bad move Magnus played the entire tournament, and it was such a bad one. So this was the opening. It's also featuring Gawain, but here we see the roles reversed. I mean, Gawain with the black pieces is such an aggressive player, and he was playing the King's Indian. He was playing the Dragon. He was really putting the pressure on the top level guys with massively complicated openings. So with the white pieces, Gawain was thinking, let's keep it quiet, let's just get some points. And with the black pieces, he was really going for it. I would say true to style. Gawain's style is one of aggression, and he was sticking with it. This is, I would say, more of Gawain's territory than Magnus's. We were a bit surprised that Magnus went into a mainline dragon without seemingly having a good idea what to do next. And Gawain has written a book about this opening, so he clearly knew what he was doing. I'm gonna say that when Magnus played g4, I was pretty optimistic during the broadcast, because I just could see that, okay, Gawain is thinking. This is a pretty standard looking move, and Gawain is thinking. This feels like a good idea for Magnus, because it looks like a normal move, and you want your opponent out of preparation. Up to this point, Gawain had played every single move instantaneously. So he was clearly in some dangerous dragon preparation. And then I saw the computer evaluation. And it turns out it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't a good idea. So after f4, we have the attack on the bishop, and at the same time, the queen is attacking the knight. I guess the main thing is that the bishop no longer defends the knight, and there's no way of saving both knight and bishop in the same move. So Magnus Carlsen wins blunder of the tournament, biggest blunder, with his g4 losing a piece to a single pawn, Valer is asking, when are you going to play today? So I'm having this review or recap of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament for an hour now, and then I'll be having my Fischer random match against John Bartholomew that will start in a bit under 3 hours at 8 p.m. Oslo time. Yeah, and Dodidor is in the chat informing us that Magnus did say that it was a blunder. He had not seen this f4 move, or at least the consequences of the move, and yet he went on to win the game. So h4 takes h6, queen up, attacking stuff on c6, on d5, but bishop b7 is such a good defensive move, just covering both those threats. And then after knight e4, rook e6, h5. This was the critical moment of the game, because I honestly believe that had this been a blitz game, had Gawain just followed his instinct, I think there's no doubt in my mind that he would have played g5, which is just a good move. The white rooks are having trouble finding open files to exert pressure on. And yes, there's a big weakening of the white squares near the black king. But on the other hand, you're a piece up. So you can afford to do something not according to book. If that only means that you'll keep your extra piece. So this g5 move would be the first choice of any player low on time. But I think what happened to Gawain is that he was so surprised that Magnus had blundered a piece. He was really overthinking stuff. He was spending so much time, and I think it was something psychological. I think that he started seeing ghosts and decided, let's just get the queens off. And he goes queen b6, and then after g5, which is a fantastic move. But also now there's files for the white rooks up against black's king. And already in this position, it's unclear. Magnus has succeeded in creating some complications. So even with the piece down here, after h takes g5, queen a3, even the computer is saying that this is equal. So just because he didn't go g5 and he didn't manage to close down the king side, Gawain ended up in a lot of trouble. And it's all after that I thought he had no chance in the game, because how do you come back from being a clean piece up against the world champion and then suddenly sitting there having a massively complicated position? And that's also a very interesting point about psychology, is that had you offered this position to Gawain before the game started, he would have been very happy to get a complicated position with unclear consequences and chances for both sides against Magnus. But having the prehistory of the game, having that thought fester in his head that he was a piece up and had managed to just blow it all away, and now there was massive danger going on towards the black king, I don't think it's possible to get back from that. I think having this position after a complicated opening and having this position after having had a winning opening and then blundered and let your opponent back into the game, it's just two completely different scenarios, and it's impossible to treat them the same, even if the position on the board is the same. So that was the biggest blunder of the tournament. Mr. Carlsen, the winner of that award. And now the next one is the biggest disappointment. And then you just have to basically check the standings to see who did not do very well. And one of those guys was the American, Fabiano Caruana. He started out the tournament as the second on the world ranking, and he's ended up the tournament in 8th place. So just a horrible tournament for Fabiano. And yeah, I don't know what to say. To my mind, he was the favorite for the candidates tournament. Also, Magnus, in interview with Norwegian TV, has said that he thinks Fabiano will win the candidates. And now he goes and delivers a performance like this. And probably it doesn't matter. Probably, I mean, as long as it's not the candidates, he can survive having a bad tournament. But it's so difficult not to get affected, not to let your confidence take a hit when you have a bad tournament like this. White Dancing Rockstar is suggesting Hu Yifan for the biggest disappointment. And she gets an honorable mention, definitely. Both Fabiano and Hu Yifan lost about 25 rating points each, which at this level is basically unthinkable. I've lost 20 rating points a couple of times, and every single time I've thought nobody can possibly do worse than this. So for everybody who's had a bad tournament, I guess this is some kind of relief that it's possible, even at the highest level, you don't manage to keep your best game always. You have variance in your performances. But this was not the tournament for Hu Yifan. It was not the tournament for Fabiano Caruana. And my game example for Fabiano is going to be this game, in which he was completely crushing Wesley So. I mean, White's position is just so good, and Black is stuck on the last two ranks, basically trying to hold on. And hold on, he did. Wesley So managed to make a draw, and I think that was the start of what could have been Fabiano's comeback. I mean, had Fabiano won this game, he would have been up there. He would have been like a point, 1.5 points behind the leaders. Whereas with drawing this game, he stayed on a minus score and never came back. So we're going to go to move 40, or to be more precise, move 41. Here, Wesley played D2. It's move 41. The players have just gotten extra 50 minutes to think. And watching the game live, we could see that the computers were giving an absolutely fantastic variation for White, beginning with rook to D1. And so I thought that having this amazing possibility, Fabiano would win the game. As it turns out, I was wrong. He did not win the game, and he did not find this very good move. So first, let's see why it's a good move. Rook D1 invites knight C3 check. So naturally, we would think that this move is terrible. But we need to look further, because after King E5, knight takes on D1, there's actually checkmate going on with these white pieces. Rook E8 check, the king has only one square, to G7, then F6. Now if the knight sacrifices itself, it's going to be an easy checkmate. Take, takes, king, and there's the combination of bishop and rook checkmating the black king. So after F6, you cannot take this pawn. And after King H7, there's F7. White is a rook down, full rook down. The black pawn is very close to promoting, but none of that matters because White is the one threatening checkmate in one move with pawn takes G8, and there's no escaping it. If the knight moves, you get a new queen anyhow, and this is a winning position for White. So that would have been very clever, going rook D1. Fabiano played rook F1, And what happened was that Wesley played d1. He gave up his pawn, and then he gave the check. So the only difference between this position and the other position is that there's no black pawn on d2. So by going to f1, Fabiano managed to eliminate one of the dangerous black pawn. But actually that pawn was very useful for the white cause, because if now white plays king e5, then you can go rook e2, check first, and then you take the rook. And this possibility was not there when the black pawn was on d2. So Fabiano ended up getting into the fork with the knight attacking both the king and the rook, so by going rook f1 instead, he didn't avoid the fork. He made a draw because after king d4, f6, there's new threats of checkmate. Only this time, black is able to get out of them with checking with his rook. So first he sacrifices his knight, and then he does some checks. And basically white cannot get away from these checks, because if he goes king b4, then rook e3 will prevent checkmate on e8. So it ended up in a draw. It should have been a win. And I think the main reason why I was so disappointed was that this was move 41 for Fabiano. And he had 50 extra minutes. And it's always much easier to sit with the computer just saying that it's winning. But to me, it feels like a line he should have been able to find. And the fact that he didn't find it was probably a symptom of that he wasn't at his best, and as demonstrated by his result. He lost 25 rating points, and Fabiano Caruana wins biggest disappointment. Basically the one prize you do not want to win. Perpetual Stalemate has an interesting comment in the chat. He thinks that Hu Yifan versus Giri affected both players. Hu Yifan lost her confidence and Giri got wings. Yeah, maybe. I actually think that was a pretty well played game by Anish. The queen ending, they had this queen ending with equal amount of pawns. And it was never easy to defend for Yifan, and she ended up going astray into a pawn ending. So yeah, that could have been an interesting game. I think it's similar to the game Magnus won against Hu, that she ended up in some moderately unpleasant position and didn't manage to defend. And to me, that's just, it's one of the most dangerous things you can do in this field. That if you get some unpleasant endgame against these guys, it's just very often a death sentence. Because they're very tricky. They are able to find creative ways of playing for a win. It's just, they're very good chess players. I'm gonna do the Homeboy Hero prize, which cannot be a very big surprise having included the word Homeboy, because that is our second place finisher, Mr. Anish Giri. And he had an amazing tournament, when Fabiano lost 26 rating points, Anish ended up winning 25. So just an amazing tournament for Anish. He made a score that would make Magnus proud, and we know that because Magnus made the same score, and Magnus was ecstatic about his performance, and he thought he had played very well, and consequently, of course, so did Anish. So I'm gonna show the Anish's biggest win from the tournament. It's against Mamedyarov, who we remember was up there leading the pack for a pretty long period of time. And in this game, I must say that I was really disappointed by Shak. He is now the world #2 player, but the way he handled himself in this game was disappointing. In the end, it's a very nice positional win for Anish. So we start out here with black having the bishop pair, but and both players having an isolated pawn. So white's justification of getting this position is that he wants to put a knight on c5, a knight on e5, and he wants to restrict the black bishop on c8. And essentially in this game, Anish achieved every one of those things. And it's also why I'm disappointed about Mamedyarov. It's because he seemed to allow white to execute his plans so effortlessly. And I would have expected more resistance from him in here. The chat is talking a bit about my Fischer random match against John Bartholomew. And that is going to start at 8 p.m. Oslo time. 8 p.m. Rook e1. And now Queen d6. Which was just the first step in what I think was a failed plan. Because look at the next 7 moves. Knight e4. Threatens the queen. Also thinks about going to c5. Queen exchange. No. Going a5, the queen is pushed back. So now we have 1, 2 queen moves, and we get another one. This is 3 queen moves in the last 4 moves. White gets his knight to c5. White gets his knight to e5. So the stuff we talked about, the bishop is still restricted. White has gotten his knights very well placed. And now after f6, knight c4, queen back, we see that the plan starting with queen d6 just ended up with the queen making 4 moves, being pushed away by the white pieces. The white pieces have improved their positions, and the black queen just ends up essentially where it started. And in the meantime, black still has a bishop on c8 being blocked by its own pawn. The bishop on g7 is also not good because now there's a pawn blocking on f6. And this is just a horrible position for black, whereas he was moderately fine 6-7 moves ago. So this was a nice positional win for Anish, but also to me surprising how easily Mamedyarov, the new world #2 player, he really caved too easily. We'll go through the finish of the game. e5 takes. Look at this pawn structure. It's no good. 3 pawn islands, whereas white only has 1 on the queen side. The justification of this last e5 move was, of course, to open up for the bishop. So he's giving himself pawn weaknesses to get the bishop out. But as the game proceeded, we're going to look at what happened when Mamedyarov played bishop f5. And this was a very big moment for Anish, going g4, saying that the one square you're willing to put your bishop to get it out, I'm just gonna weaken my king to force the bishop back. And if you take on g4, there's some things with the queen attacking c5, but you go knight a4 first, and then you can take the piece on g4 in the next move. So g4 was a brilliant move by Anish, and you can really see how the bishop is restricted. And now Anish is just doubling up with the rooks on the e file, going after the pawn on e5. So a very well done game by Anish, just making good solid moves, preventing his opponent from getting his bishops to show their force. And yeah, no, in general, just a great game from Anish. Actually, here after knight e4, Shak already resigned, but this pawn is in danger, this pawn is in danger, this pawn is in danger. The only pawn that's not presently in danger is the c6 pawn, but it's isolated with no protection from the black pieces, so it might end up in trouble pretty soon anyhow. And I think a possible continuation would be something like king g6, rook e3, and suddenly it's not just a problem of the black pawns, it's also that white has a massive attack going on against a poorly defended, pretty naked king. So that was our Homeboy Hero Award for Anish Giri and his very nice game beating Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, the #2 player in the world. G4 was amazing, says HT92 in the chat. Yusevich is making a point out of that the ELO gap between Caruana and Giri decreased by 50 points. So Anish gained 25, Caruana lost 25, and still Fabiano is ahead of Giri in the rating, in the ranking lists. So there was a big gap between those two guys, but this tournament closed it pretty much, very close to closing the entire gap. My next award is the top opening disaster. Top opening disaster. Then go ahead, make your guesses while I find the game. And I suppose Magnus's blunder could have qualified, but at least he had started thinking. So the opening disaster we're going to be checking out is a game of Mamedyarov, actually. Here it is. Yusevich is suggesting that Hu Yifan could win the opening disaster award. No, she got some pretty good competition there. And I don't think she lost too many of her games in the opening. She had a poor opening against Gawain Jones, but that was actually one of the games where she fought back. I suppose she also had a bad game against Wesley So in the last round. But it was not as bad as this one. This is Peter Svidler with the white pieces. And he went for c4. We got a reasonably normal Queen's Gambit declined after a transposition of moves. Bishop b4, this is the Ragozin line. And after takes, Svidler played the unusual move Bishop f4. And the thing is that if you're going to play something like Bishop f4, you kind of need to know what you're doing. It's an interesting line, and I have played against it as black more than once. And I know from looking at analyzing the opening that some of the lines are pretty decent for white. But after knight e4, Svidler already made a mistake. So I think here you're supposed to go rook c1, protecting the c3 square. And instead Svidler went queen a4. Which, number one, it puts the queen on a not fantastic square. But number two, and more importantly, it helps black develop while not really doing anything about the core issues in the white position. Namely that you need to get your pieces out on the king side. So after knight c6, you block the check while still protecting your bishop. So there's no loss of a piece. Now Svidler played rook c1. But after castles and g3, he really wasn't very good at following the opening principles. And the opening principles are get your pieces out and your king into safety. Mamedyarov, who actually I'm going to use this game to illustrate two prizes. It is the top opening disaster for Petr Svidler, but it's also the reward or mention for Mamedyarov, who is now the world #2 player and by a big margin as well. I mean, he has more than 10 points down to #3 in the rankings. And he took advantage of the poor opening here from Petr Svidler. He played g5. Very, very aggressive, but also very, very good. The bishop has to retreat. And then comes f5. And suddenly black is creating massive trouble, especially for the bishop on e3, but also the white king, because the king hasn't gotten to safety and there's some big issues coming up. Bishop g2 preparing to castle. f4 takes. Well, he included takes on c3. It's not too much of a big deal. Bishop back. And now just king h8 from Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. Just saying that I got my king hidden away in the corner. Your king is going to be stuck in the center for a very long time. I'm just going to checkmate you where you stand. And if white tries to escape, well, then there's the matter of the G file with the rook pointing down. It's going to create some big trouble for white. So therefore, Svidler avoided doing the castling, but then his king was just stuck in the center. And after queen b3, he even allowed knight a5 and the knight coming to c4. And just like Anish in the previous game, the game where Mamedyarov lost, now he is the one with the advanced pawns well protected by the advanced knights, of course, well protected by a good pawn, and black is just completely dominating. Rook d1, rook g8, threatening on g2. How do you protect that bishop? If you go with the king, you're probably just moving your king closer to getting checkmated. If you move the bishop, this has to be one of the saddest moves ever. Your piece is just completely stuck on the back ranks, and you have nothing to contribute to the game. So so Svidler went for knight e5, trying to get some exchanges. Takes, and now queen g5 is a very cool move, threatening queen g1, checkmate. And basically to give himself air, Svidler sacrificed a piece. So if you go bishop c1, then knight c4. The knight takes away the escape square on d2, and there's no way to stop queen g1 on the next move. At least not while simultaneously saving your bishop on e4. So he decided to go bishop takes f4, takes back, and basically now you don't have the checkmate issue, but you do have the issue of being a bishop down. So after bishop takes d5, Svidler resigned 21 moves into the game after bishop f5. And thank you to Udai for subscribing. You can see my new very cherry star, meaning that I have learned some technical stuff, which I suppose is an achievement in itself. And it's going to get much better. There's going to be a GIF with a hammer crashing down on a chessboard. It's going to be so good. I can't wait to upload it for later when it's ready. Vertvich is saying, so Peter Svidler wins everything in Russia, but then he's doing poorly on the international circuit. Yeah, I don't know, but the fact that Svidler has won the Russian championship 8 times, it's a pretty good indication of that he's not a bad player. He's a very good player. Thank you also to Distant Fire, who wanted to see the dancing star. Subtrain. Is that a Twitch thing? That everybody just at the same time? Svidler played some amazing games this tourney. Look at the one against Magnus. Yeah, that is true. A very good point from Sleman. That Svidler and Magnus played one of the most entertaining, incredible games in the entire tournament. So, and also, I mean, I lost against Peter in just 2 months ago. So I still think he's a very good player. I think he's a very good player. But he was not a very good player here. And that is why Peter Svidler wins the top opening disaster in this Hammer Awards show. We also have another award for this game. It's for Mamedyarov. A very nice black win against a strong opponent. Aggressive, which I think is the trademark of Mamedyarov. This G5, F5, F4, you could never stop the Azeri Grandmaster from making moves like that. It's just in his blood. That's how he plays chess. Super aggressive. And often we see that super aggressive players are not that successful and are more kind of trouble stabilizing their rating. But now Mamedyarov is a clear world number 2, and to celebrate that, I am giving the world number 2 award. I couldn't come up with something better, but world number 2 award, and congratulations on a good tournament to Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. And Yusevich is asking me, did you see their analysis? Yes, we were broadcasting 10-15 minutes of Carlsen and and Svidler analyzing their amazing game was being broadcasted on Norwegian TV. We were doing coverage of the Tata Steel tournament, and we showed the entirety of the analysis session between Svidler and Carlsen, and it was fascinating. But just the game itself was also stunning. I'm starting to think I made a mistake not to include it on my list. I should have had an award for best draw. You know what? I'm just gonna add it. I don't have time to look at it, but I'm gonna add the award for best draw to Magnus Carlsen and Peter Svidler. Congratulations, boys. So my last two categories are the best game and top tiebreak player. And both games are very nice positional wins from the world champion, from the Tata Steel Chess 2018 champion, Magnus Carlsen. So the first one I'll look at is his win against Wesley So. So Magnus's win against Wesley So is my best game from this tournament. You're not quite first award. Yeah, no, that's a pretty good suggestion, Mamedyarov. You're not quite first, but well done, kid. That's a decent candidate. Sounds better, or at least funnier, than world number 2. I gotta wrap this up in half an hour because I need to prepare for my match against John Bartholomew. So if you haven't heard, later this evening I will be playing a Fischer random match against Finns or John Bartholomew, and it's going to be really exciting. We're going to get time on the Twitch front page, which is, as I understand it, a very big deal. So I'm looking forward to it. We'll be playing 3 hours of Fischer random. So make sure to stay tuned for that. But I better not lose my voice until that. So I'm gonna go through the last 2 games reasonably quickly. Megat is asking, will JB be streaming as well? Yes, it's a dual stream. So you can watch me, you can watch him, you can switch it up. Or you can watch both of us at the same time. I'm not sure how you would manage to watch both at the same time, but that's your problem, not mine. Legendary Oloth is saying that I fixed the volume issue. You're not the first one to say that today, but I have no idea what I did. I have not done anything different. I swear to God. What time will it start? It'll start in 2 hours. 2 hours on the dot. Probably I'll start my stream a little bit before that. Hammer him, hammer, says Megat. Yeah, so let's look at this Carlsen So game. I'm gonna go into it in the opening. It was a very interesting opening, actually, because Magnus, yeah, I have to show the opening. So here, going c4, Wesley So decided to give away his bishop on an undeveloped white knight. But what he achieves is that after queen takes bishop b4, the king actually has to move because there's no knight to put in between the check. And all of this was played before. Actually, even Wesley and Magnus had this position against each other previously at chess.com for the speed chess match. So they both had this position. And what's interesting here is that Wesley was playing reasonably quickly. Wesley had this position both with white and with black. So he had experience from both colors. But here Magnus took a break to think, and he came up with taking on d5 and then e4. And I think this is one of Magnus's main strengths, that he's very good at evaluating changes to the pawn structure. And I think he demonstrated that so brilliantly in this game. So he goes for the central advance, getting that pawn to e5, restricting the black pieces a little bit. Note that this pawn cannot be taken, because then you take back, it's a check, but it's also threatening on b7. And if you get to take on b7, the rook cannot escape. So taking the pawn on e4 essentially loses a rook. And that's not a good thing. So Wesley went bishop e7, which is clever because now he's going queen b6 and threatening the pawn on d4. Which is why Magnus's move is also brilliant, because he goes bishop b5, allowing black to just block the check with his pawn. But now Magnus goes e5 and he managed to eliminate this queen b6 option. So that was very cool strategy from white. Queen f4, bishop d3, c5 takes, knight c6. I'm gonna go a bit quickly here to this move, king e2. So the position we have is that the white king is still in the center. Black has an isolated pawn, so we can hope to attack this somehow. But it doesn't feel like a very dangerous position. It feels like black is doing very well. And Wesley played knight d4, going into opposite colored bishops. This decision was actually criticized by Magnus, and he said that he thought he got pretty easy play right now. And as it turns out, he was right. But that was by no means obvious at this stage. Takes f4. We see that the white king is still in the center, while black manages to castle his. To me, there's nothing big saying that this is a huge white advantage. But then with hindsight, seeing how Magnus coped with this position, it's easy to go like, yeah, Magnus knew what he was doing. White is definitely better here. To me, it looks like the white king is in the center. It's opposite colored bishops. Making something happen here would require something special. And I think that's precisely what Magnus managed to achieve. He achieved something special. Queen d2, queen goes back, rook e1. So queen goes back is to take control over the e6 square, so that he can go f6 and open up some files for the rook. So f6, if black gets to take this pawn, the rook will be threatening stuff very close to the white king, and it's going to be big trouble. So here Magnus played e6. That was supposed to be his big advantage, that he had this kind of central control. And he just gives away this pawn with a check. And to me, that's just amazing play. Realizing that even here, black has some awkward problems to face. And now king f3. The king is being so comfortable in the center of the board. It's saying, well, I want to join the fun. Let's go up. Let's not go down. Queen d7, rook to the center, queen up, and now bishop g6. And this is essentially Magnus's strategy. He's exploiting the weaknesses created in the black position by putting the pawns on black squares. As a general rule, and this might feel counterintuitive, but very often you want to place your pawns on the same color specter as your opponent's bishop, simply because those pawns are helping restrict your opponent. So as long as you kind of don't give the opponent the chance to attack your pawns from behind, they do a very good job of protecting each other and blocking out opponents' pieces if they stand on the same square as your opponent's bishop. And it's easy to demonstrate when you have the opposing thing, right? When you have the pawns on the opposite of your opponent's bishop, you see that this guy is just a complete monster. Complete monster. Wesley here played f5, which the computers consider a mistake. But I think it also illustrates the pressure he was under. And he really wanted to get his rook up to f6 and push away the white bishop. And Magnus, with a pawn down in an opposite colored bishop ending, he's going for the queen exchange. And he has correctly assessed that both this pawn and the pawn on f5 will drop off, in which case he's suddenly a pawn up and can try to push for a win like that. Linoleum has a question in the chat. If both players have a light squared bishop in an endgame, what color should you put your pawns? Yeah, no, it's difficult to assess because every situation is different. But I think as a general rule, you should have the pawns opposite your own bishop so that they work together. Pawns and bishop work together the best when, for instance, the bishop takes the dark squares and the pawns take the light squares. So bishops, when you only have one bishop, you can have a problem with control of the color spectre your bishop doesn't control. And since pawns move or captures sideways, they are very good to place on the opposite color of your bishop so that the two armies complement each other. Hey Chess Bay in the house. Fisher Random in 2 hours against John Bartholomew. We're actually gonna have to cut it short a little bit. I'm gonna finish this game and then I'm gonna say something about the tiebreak, and we're gonna finish off. Rook e5, attacking both pawns, and both pawns fell. Rook f6, getting the bishop out, but at the cost of losing 2 pawns. So now we have a new situation. We have an opposite colored bishop endgame where white is a pawn up. And anyone who's done anything about opposite colored bishops know that it's not easy to win games with opposite colored bishops. So it's interesting to see how Magnus managed to make the most of this. And I think the first very cool decision is this g5 move. And this is Wesley's decision. He made it while under time pressure, which I thought it was impressive. I thought making a move like that, especially when Magnus can take on b7 with check, I thought that was a very good move. As a general rule, when you are defending, when you're pawns down or a pawn down, very often you want to exchange pawns, because 5 against 4 pawns will usually be winning for the guy with 5 pawns. But on the other hand, 1 pawn against none is very, very often a draw. So when defending worse endgames, you want to exchange pawns. And that's what Wesley was doing here with his g5 move. As it turned out, he ended up getting another idea that I don't need to exchange on f4. I can even just win a piece with g4. But of course, Magnus allowed that. Magnus allowed g4, and one of the advantages here of sacrificing the bishop is that now you eliminate the opposite colored bishops. You eliminate the opposite colored bishops. So the drawing chances are still present, but it doesn't work the same way as opposite colored bishops. Now it's a struggle for black trying to make sure that his bishop stays active and manages to counteract all of the white pawns. We'll fast forward a little bit more. Wesley actually defended very well at this stage. This king g8 move, and then bishop e5. Bishop e5 was a good move, getting one of the white rooks out of play whilst simultaneously doing some pressure against the b2 pawn. Takes, 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 bishop d4, and now rook e2. So here's the question for the chat. Black is attacking both h2 and b2. Which pawn do you protect? Which one do you try to keep? I think the answer to this was very instructive, and it's not something I necessarily would have come up with, I think. Yeah, Suleiman and Suleiman is right on top of this. What Magnus did, and what was also such a brilliant decision, was to play b3. And I think the idea is to have 2 pawns on both sides of the board. So when you have 2 pawns, they can protect each other, which is just so useful. So I think, to me, I was very tempted to think that, okay, with 3 passed pawns, connected passed pawns, I would just rush my opponent and create something. But Magnus's decision to play b3 was very, very good, because he kept the option of pawns protecting each other as they advanced up the board. And now actually taking the pawn on h2 was the losing move from Wesley. And I think it's actually precisely because of this reason that the pawns can protect each other. So he should have gone a4, because then when I take on a4, the pawns are doubled and they become isolanis, and they can no longer protect each other going forward, trying to become a new queen. And after rook takes h2, a5, there's just one move that's good enough, and that's rook h6, coming back to block the passed a pawn. But on the other hand, it seems like this is actually enough. So Wesley, having been under pressure for a long time, Magnus creating some magic out of what seemed like almost nothing. He managed to get to this moment, and Wesley made the wrong decision. So Wesley took on h2. I should say that according to the Tata Steel Twitter feed, Vladimir Kramnik was interviewed about this position, and Kramnik said that he thought it should be a technical win for white. So Kramnik's intuition was that this position should be winning. And he was right after rook takes h2, but the computers are saying that maybe a4 was the last chance to keep white's pawns at bay. Distant Fire is providing some context in the chat. A4 confused Magnus, he said. So Magnus commented on A4 and he thought that, well, probably both players didn't think it was very good. He analyzed it with Eric afterwards and he was confused about A4. Okay, so it seems like both Magnus's and Wesley's instinct was that A4 probably wouldn't be a good move. But the computers are saying that it was the last chance. And I think the reason it was the last chance was that this position, where the pawns are able to protect each other on their travels across the board, is just so difficult to handle. So you needed to double those white pawns when you had the opportunity. Yeah, I should mention this. Megid asks, if a4, what about b4? But that would be a big mistake, because here you have rook a2. You ignore the pawn on h2, but on the other hand, you get the pawn on a3. But more so, you're also protecting the pawn on a4. So here actually even black could hope to try to win the game, because he has a passed pawn after the rook takes an a3 on the next move. I'm going to wrap it up. We're just going to look at the final moves. I thought Magnus's technique from this point on was also very, very nice. How he forces the bishop away from the powerful central square. How he just pushes those pawns, but doesn't rush it. And I think that's the essence here, right? That he gets the pawns slowly but surely forward, but he doesn't rush it. And he's always ready to protect one of the pawns with the other pawn. So g4, we can see that he keeps his pawns close together. Now he goes a5. But is he going to go a6? He just went a5. Is he going to go a6? No, he's not. Then the pawn is going too far away from its buddy. And he might end up losing it. So after having gone a5, he follows up with b4, making sure that those two guys are always present, defending each other. And then also this decision to go king c4 was very nice. Realizing that if Wesley were to take the pawn on f4, then rook f5 forces a rook exchange, after which these two pawns, with the help of the white king, would decide the game. So very nice the way he indirectly protected the pawn on f4, because he realized a rook exchange would be very favorable. King comes, and yet again we see Magnus really going for that rook exchange, forcing Wesley once again to, number one, avoid this rook exchange, but also avoiding this rook exchange. Even this is winning for white. So Wesley has to go away with his rook, but then he's blocking for the bishop, pointing back, guarding against the white pawns. and there's a check, goes to attack the g4 pawn, and now he just defends it. And once again, we see the benefit of having the pawns close to each other the whole way. And here Magnus with rook d3 is doing another let's exchange rooks, and Wesley is going, no, I cannot allow that. But also once again the pawn is indirectly defended, because after bishop takes f4, now there's a pin against the bishop towards the black king. So all the way Magnus is defending his pawns in very innovative ways, always going for the rook exchange and having some simple but very important tactics to make sure that his rook is well placed while simultaneously protecting the advance of the pawn. b6, and just the difference between when we started out, right? These pawns are so much farther up the board, and black hasn't really accomplished anything in the meantime. Wesley has had some tactics he tried out, but Magnus was always ready with this rook exchange idea. And for the finishing touch, after the bishop finally takes one of the white pawns, the rook says bye-bye, and Wesley had to resign. There's no way the black rook is able to stop these two pawns. But just for the record, if black were to take on g5, once again, do make sure that one pawn doesn't run away from the other. Going for the new queen would be a terrible mistake with the rook and king, the queen and king on the same file. So instead, you should just keep going with the pawns, making sure that they are helping each other all the way. And after a7, we can see two white pawns on the 7th rank. That is the ultimate nightmare. And this was a very good game from Magnus. I have decided it is the best game of Tata Steel chess tournament in my little award ceremony. For the record, I also want to hand out the tiebreak maestro to Magnus Carlsen, who has now won yet another tiebreak match, and he has won every single tiebreak match tournament playoff he's played in since 2007. So that's pretty sick. He is the tiebreak champion, and for the Tata Steel chess tournament he used that ability to take the first place, although Anish Giri of course had an amazing tournament too. That's it from me. I'm gonna have some dinner, and I hope to see everybody back in, well, an hour and a half, maybe even less, for me to play my Fischer random match against John Bartholomew. It's going to be very exciting. Different opening position for every single game. No opening theory required. It's going to be an interesting one. We're going to be featured on the Twitch homepage or Twitch front page, which, as I understand it, is a very, very big deal. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope as many of you as possible will join me and cheer for the Norwegians instead of the Americans. In some ways, this Fischer random match is a prequel to the big Carlsen Nakamura Fischer random match, which will take place in 2 weeks' time. So This is actually me preparing for that Carlsen Fischer random match by giving myself some experience in the variant, and then I thought, who's a better opponent than John Bartholomew? I could not think of one, and so we're gonna have our little Norway versus the USA match. Legendary Oloth says, have you offered to assist Magnus preparing 960 games against Naka? No, I have not, but I have talked to Magnus's seconds and strongly advised those seconds that they should be ready to do something for the match, because it's a bit of a tricky format. They are playing the same position twice, once with the white pieces and once with the black pieces, and as such, one of the games they will know in advance what position they're getting, and then they might actually have to do some preparation in the break to be able to avoid the biggest opening traps. I have been ignoring the chat a little bit today. I apologize, but I'll be more proactive when playing myself. Here I had more of a message I wanted to convey. So congratulations to our winners, Gawain Jones, Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana. Although he won the prize you do not want to win. Carlsen has taken quite a few prizes, but also good mentions for Anish Giri and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. That's it from me right now, and let's come back in an hour and do some Fischer Random. See you guys.